This sutta, the Anatta-Lakkhana Sutta, is the second sutta ever presented by the Buddha. This, along with the fire discourse, the third sutta, are considered, the word often given to them as the cardinal discourses, meaning they are, these first three discourses define the entire Buddha's teaching. And when you look at them in a rather broad way, the first teaching the Buddha ever gave, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the setting the wheel of truth in motion, the Four Noble Truths, is a broad teaching on impermanence, isn't it? And that our relationship with stress and suffering is impermanent, and we can change our relationship. That's what the Eightfold Path, the Fourth Noble Truth, is about, recognizing and abandoning ignorant views that give rise to our own contributions to stress and suffering. And then the second sutta, the Anatta-Lakkhana Sutta, the sutta on the not-self characteristic, was presented to those same 5 friends, now bhikkhus, who are developing the Dhamma. It's likely about a month or 2 after that first discourse, probably closer to a month and 2 months, just on the number of people. And a bit of speculation on my part, but this was taught because he's listening to his 5 friends, now bhikkhus, and their confusion over what is this idea? What's the Buddha mean by not self and anatta? And they might have understood it in a different way. And so he taught this. And you can say this about just almost every one of the Buddha's teachings is that they were situational, meaning he was teaching to a question or something that he observed in the local community. Not all of them, but many of them are situational in that way. And then the third discourse is the fire discourse, which teaches how passions arise and give rise to dukkha. So the first 3 discourses, again, in a broad sense, speak directly to what we're studying here, the 3 marks of existence. And this second discourse, the middle discourse of these 3, speaks directly to that middle characteristic of anatta. You'll notice in this sutta where the Buddha refers to, probably the first time ever, to the 5 clinging aggregates. He doesn't identify them as such. That was a label given later. But this is another sutta where you can say, this is the entire Dhamma, because it gets right to the heart of what we're looking at. An understanding of self in relation to the world that it finds itself in. The Anatta-Lakkhana Sutta. On one occasion, the Buddha was staying in Benares, in the deer park at Isipatana. There he addressed the group of 5 bhikkhus. Bhikkhus is somebody who is taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha in a formal way. Bhikkhus, form is not self. Were form self, then this form would not lead to suffering. And one could have it be any form desired and stress-free. Right off the bat, the Buddha is teaching his 5 friends, and now us 2,600 years later, that if we're experiencing stress at all, in any manner, within our body, it's because of a wrong view. It's not self. And it's only because of self-identifying, the Buddha would often use the word join. We self-identify, we join with our suffering. We create an identity over it, that we contribute to ongoing stress and suffering. And once we set that in motion, that initial wrong view the Buddha described in Dependent Origination from Ignorance of 4 Noble Truths through 12 observable causative links, all manner of suffering arises. Once we have established an ignorant view, this is what follows. And it's not, if we're good or bad or don't have enough merit or don't know the right people or anything. It has no bearing on anything external. Once the human mind is rooted in ignorance, it will cling to these things, these 5 clinging aggregates, and create ongoing confusion, delusion, greed, stress, and suffering. Right off the bat, the Buddha gets there. Were form self, then this form would not lead to suffering, and one could have it be any form desired and stress-free. The Buddha is talking about when we attach to something, we're creating an ownership of that thing, aren't we? This is mine. And the Buddha is saying that if you own something, you should be able to do whatever you want with it. But we can't, can we? We don't own it. That's at its most profound level, that's a very subtle thing to grasp, but it's the essence of this. And how is that reflected in our Dhamma practice? It's anybody. How do we remind ourselves that this is not what I am?
This is not me. This is not mine. This is not
Yeah.
myself.
That common refrain that is the essence of the Dhamma. Since form is not self, it leads to suffering, and none can have it be any form desired and stress-free. Bhikkhus. Feeling is not self, as perceptions are not self, fabrications are not self, consciousness is not self. Buddha just covered the 5 clinging aggregates. These things that we use to describe ourselves to ourselves as this is me. I feel this way, I think this way. I have these thought constructs, mental fabrications. My thinking directs me in a certain way. And we cling to all of these things, don't we? And once we have established that craving for and clinging to relationship, that's us.
Is that name and form in dependent origination?
Yes.
Name and form is 5 clinging aggregates.
Yep. And name and form applies to so many different things, including anatta. You could, in a not all that broad sense, say karma is nama rupa, is name and form, because it's that self-identification with form in that sense. In the phrase nama rupa, name and form, is any physical object. And even a physical object such as an idea generated in our head. I know that seems like I'm stretching it, but we create objects out of the things that we think, and we make them real, even though they're not, even though they're simply just a figment of our imagination.
So that also describes action at that point too, because we're identifying self-referential views at that point, name and form.
Yes, and that's why it's essentially karma means action too. But karma is not an action happening to us. Karma is the results of our actions in the present moment, not past, present, not past or future, right here, right now. And by ongoing self-referential views, by ongoing namarupa, identifying with form, we are continually distracted towards maintaining that ignorance.
So even if you're practicing restraint and this 10% control without right view, it's really a fabrication.
Yes, and you bring up such an important point. One of the reasons why modern Buddhism has created entire lineage dharmas over the idea of nothingness and emptiness is just that, because they couldn't figure out a way to resolve this issue without looking at ignorance, which is something nobody wants to do unless you're a true Dhamma practitioner. So we create these fabrications such as the self is nothing, there's no such thing as a self, and we aspire to this grand, vague experience of ongoing emptiness, which sounds, if you can't reconcile the not self characteristic, that's really all you have to go with, that, well, this thing is not really real. It's not me. The Buddha taught that everything, including the self, is empty of any actual existence. And of course, we learned last week in the Anatta-Lakkhana Sutta, it's just the opposite. The Buddha never taught there's no such thing as a self. We never taught that we should aspire towards nothingness or emptiness. Those are all fabricated. We spent many weeks on this, fabricated, speculative, non-physical realms, isn't it? And to imagine myself in emptiness is the ultimate in cruelty, isn't it, to myself? And when people teach me that I should do that, that's even more cruel. But why would I want to do that? Why would I want to engage in any practice that is self-annihilating? The Buddha, I was talking with Ram, I think, yesterday. We were talking about Abraham Maslow and what was the Maxwell Maltz, who were similar in their teachings about self-actualization. They had quite a few things wrong, but they were helpful way back then in the 60s and 70s, 80s. The Buddha was the entire essence of the Buddha's Dhamma is self-actualization, isn't it? Just the opposite of nothingness and emptiness. But self-actualization based in reality. We finally gain an understanding of who we are in relation in the world. That's freedom, isn't it? We're not constrained, we're not constricted, we're not imprisoned by our own false views. That's what the Buddha's teaching. And the second teaching he ever taught, that's how important this is. Consciousness is not self. If these aggregates were self, they would not, and I would put the word in there, and could not lead to suffering, and one could direct these aggregates as one wished. when you get caught up in your feelings or you're in driving perceptions and fabrications, can you get out of it? You can't, can you? In fact, because you can't, you will then create these ideas of emptiness, but you'll also create justification for how you feel and the perceptions leading to fabrications that you've developed. And it's always in response to the world. There's always either a very subtle, but sometimes completely obvious blaming of the external world for how I feel. And that's when a human being doesn't have a basis for understanding, it's entirely understandable to do that, because what else could you do? You can't help but blame the world and blame other people for how you feel. And even more cruel and pernicious is when that fails, and it always does, then we start pointing the finger at ourselves. There's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. That's one of the first things that Buddha recognized. There's nothing wrong with us. How could there be anything wrong with us, save for the way we're looking at ourselves? It's the entire Buddha's Dhamma. To take us from an ignorant view of who we are, which can only lead to greed, aversion, and ongoing stress and suffering, to a reality, and in that reality lies peace and freedom. So just to make that point again, there was a time, this is a little bit silly, but since I've used it before, when I was a young kid, my aspiration was to play center field for the Yankees. And despite the fact that I was just an average ball player and I was about 6 inches too short, I thought that I could. I mean, for quite a period of time, I actually thought, and I played in some summer leagues, and I actually got pretty good at that. I had a Mets scout follow me for a couple of weeks, which was pretty interesting. But that was when the Mets stunk and they would have taken anybody. The disappointment when I finally realized, which was right around, I think I was about 15 during that summer, when I finally realized that this is as good as I'm going to be, and there's no way somebody at 5'7" who's not all that quick is going to play center field for the Yankees. It was disappointing, but it was because I was clinging to that notion, that form, clinging to me being the next Mickey Mantle that I created in my mind. Nobody said you should be the next Mickey Mantle. Nobody insisted that I do it. Nobody said you have to, if you're going to be happy, you have to play center field for the Yankees. I developed that all on my own. And when it didn't happen, I was literally disappointed for a long, long time. It wasn't something that I got over quickly. And again, not to get too deep into that. And then I had to pull myself out of it, like most of us do when our dreams are shattered, to try to figure out what else am I going to do. But look at the condition that happened to me, and not just to me, it happens to everyone. I've now found in myself, because of my own fabricated belief, that I'm lacking in some way. I'm too short, I'm not fast enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the foundation that me and every other human being uses to build their life on. How could we not end up disappointed? And it's only because of a wrong view that I need to be something other than I am, which could have been just a happy and free 15-year-old boy. But of course, I grew up in the same world we all did. Since these are not self, they can only lead to suffering. And no one can have these, in parentheses, these 5 aggregates as they wish. I can't change that fact. I couldn't change the way I was feeling about it. I couldn't change my perceptions that it was required for me. And I couldn't change the overall fabrication that somehow I deserved to play center field for the Yankees simply because I am having this human life and I thought of it. Right? You get that last part? Mm-hmm. It's only because I thought that I deserved it or I should be it, and I clung to that thought tenaciously. It was the only identity I knew at the time. I built in my own disappointment, my own distraction. And in that single thought, I'm not trying to overplay this. In that single thought is greed, aversion, and deluded thinking, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And what was that greed, aversion, and deluded thinking rooted in? Now, and again, I'm making a point. A 15-year-old boy might not, even if it had the Buddha as a teacher, might not grasp that. Although the Buddha's son got it pretty good by the time he was 7. I listened to his father. It's the thoughts that mess us up. It's the thoughts that keep us stuck in greed. It's the thought that makes us think that the world right now must be different than it is. when it can't be. The world is the way it is because it's the way it is. If you want to start looking at why is there so much difficulty in the world, the Buddha explained that. Ignorance of Four Noble Truths and the greed, aversion, and deluded thinking that follows from that. Bhikkhus, how do you perceive this? Is form permanent or impermanent? Kevin?
Impermanent.
That's why I asked it. I knew that's how we would answer. The five replied, impermanent, Venerable Sir. Now, what is impermanent? Now, what is impermanent? Is it painful or pleasant? Painful, Venerable Sir. Now, is what is impermanent, what is painful, since subject to change, is this fit to be regarded as this is mine, this is I, this is myself? Is it? Are the things that we attach ourselves to, thank you, fit to be identified as me? It isn't, is it? Because it just leads to my long-term suffering, my confusion, my lack of satisfaction in this life. Because I want me and the world around me to be different than it is right now. Not when I was 15, not when I'm 65 next year, right now. If I want my life to be different than it is right in this moment, I'm stuck in ignorance, and I'm prone to stress and suffering right now. That does not mean that my life will not improve towards a common peaceful mind if I have the right teachings, if I have the right Dhamma. If not, as we talked last week, the wisdom of restraint? I can't remember these off. If I'm not able to practice it, excuse me. If I am not able to, or I'm unaware of the Dhamma in this moment, I have no opportunity to practice restraint as those deluded thoughts and feelings are arising, do I? But if I have integrated the Eightfold Path, when I notice my mind going that way, clinging to form, feeling, perceptions, fabrications, and consciousness, my ideas, if I notice it arising, then I can practice restraint and recognize this is not me, this is not myself, this is not who I am. Now, is what is impermanent painful or pleasant? Painful, Venerable Sir. Now, is what is impermanent, what is painful since subject to change, is this fit to be regarded as this is mine, this is I, this is myself? No, Venerable Sir. Is feeling permanent or impermanent? The Buddha just goes through this question. Is perception permanent or impermanent? Are fabrications permanent or impermanent? Is consciousness permanent or impermanent? Every one of these, the Buddha is pointing out that every one of these aggregates that we use to define ourselves are impermanent. And as we know, if they are impermanent, what can they not be? And why would we want something as impermanent and so subject to constant change? Constant change that we have absolutely no control over. We like to think we do, but that's a mind rooted in ignorance. Why would we attach ourselves and define ourselves by that object, rather than recognize that each and every human being is simply made up of the four elements, the space property, and the consciousness property? And then it's up to us what we do with that, isn't it? And that last property is where our resolution resides if we choose to, what is that, Mission Impossible, if you choose to accept. Anyway, it's up to us to change the way we think, isn't it? It's not up to the Buddha. It's not up to the teacher. It's not really up to the Dhamma in the sense that most people take to religion, that all I have to do is believe and eventually things will work out. It's up to us. We do the work. And so the Buddha gave us that simple path, an Eightfold Path. The Buddha continues. All are impermanent. The Buddha, the sangha, the five friends responded, all are impermanent, Venerable Sir. Now, is what is impermanent, what is painful, since subject to change? Is this fit to be regarded as this is mine, this is I, this is myself? No, Venerable Sir. So, bhikkhus, any kind of form, whatever, whether past, future, or presently arisen, whether gross or subtle, whether in oneself or external, whether inferior or superior, whether far or near, must, with right understanding how it actually is, be regarded as this is not mine, this is not I, this is not myself. I mentioned earlier these speculative teachings that go into establishing yourself in emptiness. That's what the Buddha is talking about. Whether it's past, present, or futurely imagined, it's not yourself. No matter how much you insist that you can do that you can establish yourself in some non-physical realm, and it may be because of someone that you have a lot of respect for as a teacher, or because of the particular Dharma that you're teaching and all your friends do it, doesn't make it so. If we're following the Buddha's Dhamma, we know that there's nothing that I can do. I cannot establish myself, this form, in any other way except as a vehicle for what's occurring in my life right now. And there's no me in it. Is that clear? Is anybody confused, or anybody have any questions about what I just said? No? It's okay if you do. Okay. Yes.
John.
Yes, Michael.
Well, just what you had said, establishing who you are right now. Right? That in itself is kind of not an easy thing to comprehend.
Yes.
We're talking about this moment reality.
Yep.
And as we even come here tonight, this room is in a reality.
Yep.
So some people might find this setup more comfortable, some might not. But that's the new reality.
Yep.
Yes. Reality changes all the time. Forever. It's changing, right?
Yes.
So if we want to live in or understand what it means to what being actually means, it's actually we have to be aware as we come in contact with each every reality that we face.
No. But I understand where your question is coming from.
Well, maybe
It's-
I'm not making it clear. As I said, now here we are. Right? We have to be aware of our surroundings. Again, reality is forever changing. As it changes, presents itself to us.
Yep.
Even we can't foresee how it's going to present itself, but it occurs. Yes.
Yes.
When it occurs, that's the moment we have to actually, because our response.
We have to actually what? Well,
That's when we have to actually pause for a moment when we face the reality. Because our responses to reality actually, at this stage, most of us are actually speaking for myself, I'm at.
Mhm.
My responses many times are conditioned from my ignorance.
Yes. All human beings.
So when that occurs, that's where restraint comes in. And we pause, we refer back to the Eightfold Path.
Mhm.
And as we do that, it enables us to go forward with proper way of handling our new reality.
Good word, you.
Yes. What's important to recognize is that you're contacting, and I'm having a little difficulty with your reference to realities. In other words, that there's different ones rather than simply what the randomness of things arising and passing away. It's all part of this one reality rooted in impermanence.
Yes, yes.
And we come in contact with reality. We come in contact with impermanent phenomena through our senses, the sixth sense base, 5 physical senses and that sixth sense of consciousness. And if the sixth sense base is rooted in right view, then it's interpreting what's occurring through that right view. It doesn't matter what it is. But the underlying reality, as far as Dhamma practitioners, is Four Noble Truths, which take us to the conclusion that whatever is arising in the present moment is not to be self-identified with. That's the underlying teaching. So it really doesn't matter. We can get, through a misunderstanding of what the Buddha is teaching, we can get almost hyper-focused on what's occurring right now. What's occurring right now isn't all that important. It's what's the quality of my mind. Do you see the difference?
Yes.
In this present moment, if my mind is rooted in understanding of Four Noble Truths, no matter what's arising and passing away, my mind will be calm and at peace. And isn't that what we're all after? So it's not so much what's arising and passing away. When framed by the Eightfold Path, whatever arises and passes away is impersonal. There's no attachment to it, and we simply remain at peace. Is that where you were going?
Yes, actually it is.
Yeah.
It also takes the cultivation and integration of the Eightfold Path and the way we move through our existence.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. It's just that. It's through the Eightfold Path. And again, when we start really understanding the Buddha's teaching, what he taught, and again, I say this all the time, we need to understand the context for even this straightforward sutta, or we don't really know what he's talking about. But with the framework of the Eightfold Path was taught so that we avoid confusing ourselves even in Dhamma practice, just using that idea of creating dharmas about emptiness and nothingness. We don't go there because we're simply living in reality, the reality of Four Noble Truths. The underlying reality, the world right now, what's occurring in the world, all the things going on in the world, the good things, the bad things, the good senators and the bad, whatever we want to use to distract ourselves, is not unreal. That's that pernicious and cruel idea that follows from believing in nothingness and emptiness, that nothing is actually occurring. Of course it is. That's another key teaching that the Buddha taught. Wake up and pay attention, because this is going on. It's our relationship to it that must change, that will change if we take to the Dhamma. So again, we're living in reality. We're just not seeing it correctly. And reality is, for a human being, is this physical universe that we live in. The Buddha never taught in any way that we should treat it as insignificant or empty or anything. The Buddha's teaching on emptiness, because I mentioned a few times, the Buddha's teaching on emptiness was for one specific thing, and it relates directly to dependent origination, to empty oneself of ignorance. Nothing else, not some strange place to aspire to. And that relates directly to what you were talking about in this moment. And in this moment is the only moment that I can utilize to free myself of ignorance based on what's occurring. But I prepare myself for that moment as my life unfolds through an authentic Dhamma practice. So that when that arises, whatever it might be, I'm able and ready to see it in reality. So you touched on some good points. And I would say in a few short weeks, you've really developed quite an understanding of the context, Michael. Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot though, isn't it?
Yes.
But that's why we be gentle with ourselves and we give ourselves a little bit of patience. So, okay, let me continue. And so it follows that any kind of feeling, whatever, any kind of perception, any kind of determination, meaning determination is another word for fabrication. I've made a determination over my perceptions. Any kind of consciousness, whatever, whether past, future, or presently arisen, whether gross or subtle, whether in oneself or external, whether inferior or superior, whether far or near, must, with right understanding, how it actually is, be regarded as this is not mine, this is not I, this is not myself. So getting back to what Michael so brilliantly brought up, when those things come up that are even confusing, am I practicing the Dhamma right? Even that confusion is rooted in ignorance, because you can't really practice the Dhamma wrong if you're practicing the Dhamma. So what do we know in that moment of confusion or maybe a little bit of frustration? This is not me. This is not mine. This is not myself. We talked a little bit about this in a slightly different way last week. That it's so easy because of our conditioned thinking in the familiar, our minds want to go to familiar states, that when we're struggling with Dhamma practice, this is a lot of bunk. Or maybe even a little worse is, I'm just not smart enough or committed enough to do this. The Buddha taught a Dhamma that any human being who took to it could develop it. The secret is you got to take to it.
The foundation has to be right view.
It has to be.
Because if you don't have right view, then you practice something,
Anything.
and think it's something good.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you'll think that you're in control of these aggregates. It's just a version of control.
It is. And that's, you know, that's the reason why I get a little tired of my own modern Buddhism bashing, believe it or not. But it's that reason alone that we create other dharmas, because they allow us to maintain a fabricated view, and then we incorporate all kinds of different things that sound like they're leading to the goal, but the goal now is not understanding Four Noble Truths. It's establishing myself in emptiness or nothingness.
It's our need to tweak it.
Yes.
So it's a little bit easier or a little more comfortable for my taste.
For my perceptions, for my fabrications. In other words, and you know, maybe I probably see this a little more clearly than most people, just because I've spent a lifetime looking at it this way, looking at my own distraction and confusion in modern Buddhism. How did it occur? Well, it occurred because I bought into the idea that I wanted it to be something different than what an awakened human being taught, even though at the time I didn't know it. I wanted to follow along with what people that I respected, or maybe they were just so charismatic. And the idea that I went into a Dhamma practice. I mean, I differentiate between Dharma. To me, is what the Buddha didn't teach. Dhamma is what he taught. If you go into that, if I went into it thinking that there's something wrong with me, I'm lacking something, there's something bad about me, well, then we'll grasp after anything that provides that escape from that, the resolution. Such as if I do enough chanting and meditation and bowing, once I escape this awful, horrible world that I'm living in, I'll be granted this awakened state. I've just lost my whole life doing that, haven't I? The Buddha recognized the cruelty of that through his own studies. And so he realized that what's most important is to wake up in this human life, and he taught a way to do it. Continue. Bhikkhus, when a noble follower who has heard the truth sees in this way, they find, these words are so important, they find estrangement in form. The word is so important. Now, obviously, it's a translated word, but it's so perfect.
Separation.
Even deeper than that, the form becomes strange to me. I've lost all identification. I'm estranged from it. I don't recognize it anymore.
As myself.
As myself. It's simply 6 properties. I'm estranged. I'm no longer entranced by my own views of self. And once I've freed myself from those awful views, hurtful views, I'm free. And what's the mind state of a human being who's free? None of this is me. None of this is mine. None of this is myself. And when you can live your life that way, you walk in peace and freedom, no matter what's occurring, no matter what situation you're in.
John, one point I remember sort of back in the beginning when you start to learn about self and non-self, you can get a little caught up in the idea of annihilation and all of that.
Yep.
We are 3-dimensional objects moving through space, and
Yep.
the self with a small s is the self that moves and operates through the world without falling down the stairs all the time. Or,
Yep.
you know, like you always say, the train is coming, get off the track.
Yep.
You know? But sometimes it can get confusing that there's some sort of mystical way of looking at this as us being an actual non-self being or object sitting here in this room, and that's not what he's trying to say.
Not at all. Not at all. Again, the Buddha taught the most profound way of self-actualization, meaning understanding what the self actually is. He never taught that there's no such thing as a self. He used the word anatta simply because it was a common word at the time, but he used it in a completely uncommon way, just to make that relationship, to make the hook into people. Well, wait a minute, I know what anatta is, but this is something different. It's a brilliant way of teaching, isn't it? And it works because he's taking us from a view of self that is unreal. Even though we're having, maybe that's where the difficulty is, that it feels like annihilation. We live in the world from a fabricated view, and yet we are at different levels of successfully living in that world, aren't we? We're making our way, we're making do. But dukkha occurs, doesn't it? For each and every one of us. Why? The best, not the best, the most applicable word for dukkha. I mean, it covers a gamut from mild irritation to extreme emotional and physical pain. But the best ongoing description is disappointment and unsatisfactoriness. And we all have it, don't we? And that's what leads to always grasping after something else, always needing. I am disappointed and unsatisfied with this self. So I need to make more of it. Or I need to find a way to establish it, because I understand that we all only get one life, by the way, as far as the Buddha is concerned. It doesn't matter. We may have other lives, but we need to wake up now in this life. So since I'm going to die, and everybody knows they're going to, let me latch onto something that provides for a speculative, fabricated existence in some belief system. Every single religion is based on that. Even the more humanistic religions like shamanism, they're still based on something outside of your body, isn't it? And it's all arises from the compulsive need to establish me in every thought that I can occur, including the thought of what happens to me when I die, or what happens to me when I awaken. I should get some great reward, like establishment in some non-physical realm. Forever and ever and ever. The most well-populated form of Buddhism is Pure Land Buddhism, that has some minor differences between the different schools. But that religion teaches that I used to know what the mantra was. If you keep this mantra on your tongue continually, and most importantly, when you die, at that point of death, as long as you got the mantra going, you'll be instantly taken to Amitabha Buddha heaven, and forever and ever you'll be taken care of by Amitabha Buddha. I practice that. That sounds like I can do this mantra. I don't really have to do much else. And even if I get hit by a bus, as long as I got the mantra going, I used to know what it is, I'm good to go. But even if I did that successively for 2 weeks, I just lost 2 weeks of my life trying to get someplace other than where I am. And it's all rooted in that self-loathing, that misunderstanding of self. Let me continue. Thank you, Liz. Bhikkhus, when a noble follower who has heard the truth sees in this way, they find estrangement in form, they find estrangement in feeling, they find estrangement in perception, and they find estrangement in determination or fabrications, and they find estrangement in consciousness. That when I think back to the way I used to think, not all that long ago, it's a pretty strange view that I have of the thoughts that I had. Even, we go back to 15 years old and playing for the Yankees, but a lot of strange thoughts. They seem strange to me now, the beliefs that I had about how things are and how things should be and how other people should be, how I should be, what I need. They're all strange to me now. in some ways, we talk a little bit about the absurdity of human life is absurd, but it's absurd because of that. Because we create fabrications of who we are and we cling to them. They're painful. They're foolish. And they don't lead to anything. They don't lead to anything valuable anyway. They don't lead to calm and peace. When they find estrangement, when what we used to be is now strange to us, when they find estrangement, passion fades out. With the fading of passion, they are liberated. When liberated, there is knowledge. They are liberated. They understand. Now, let me go back. I just want to use one more example from my own life about how this played out for me in a very real way. They find estrangement in feeling, perceptions, determination, and in consciousness. When they find estrangement, passion fades out. For many, many years, from the time I was about 13 to 26, and especially the last half of those, how many years is that? 13 years, the last half of those years, I was a daily drinker and almost a daily drug taker. I had a passion for staying wasted. And that, as most addicts, that became just about the only reason I was living my life up to that point. And when I finally was fortunate enough to find a way to stop, and I will say, just for the record, everybody knows, it was rooted in the original 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, something that's almost lost today. And then I began a meditation practice because that was one of those steps. The guy that people that take you through the steps are often called the sponsor. He told me, now that we've done this, go out and learn everything you can about meditation. And he wasn't a big meditator. He did a little bit with me, but that gave me license to start looking at something. And as I started doing that, my passion for drugs and alcohol, for living in that type of extreme unreality, did fade away. I had that direct experience. And of course, I've had that in many other things. And I think all of you would say that there are things that you have abandoned that you used to be passionate for and you no longer are. Correct? That's the practical application of the Dhamma, and it's just that way. And if our minds are still rooted in grasping after whatever it might be, whether it's emptiness or playing center field for the Yankees when you're 64 and you still think you can, you're just setting yourself up for constant distraction and disappointment, aren't you? But that understanding of none of this is me allows us to live in the world in a highly effective way without getting caught up in the world. And the best example of that, and again, that first thought that isn't this annihilation, all we have to do is think back to the guy that figured this out. He didn't awaken and become annihilated in the world, did he? He lived what I think is the most successful and important life any human being ever lived, when he let go of all false views of self. And those incredible teachings are still here today. And I would bet that each and every one of you would say the same thing, that you feel more a part of your life, even if you're not quite awakened yet. You've got a couple more days to go. You feel a more part of your life now, and that your life is more meaningful now than it ever has been, correct? And you don't have to agree with me. In fact, if you don't, I'd like to hear it.
I don't.
Oh, well, leave. The door's out.
I think it seems to be more superfluous, really, because it's the kind of the heart of it's taken out. You know?
Yes.
So it's not more. It doesn't come across as being more meaningful.
And that's the process, and we've talked a lot. That's the process of recognizing that is superfluous, and so you're coming to grips with just that. And there's a process within the Dhamma that, maybe I'll put a different word to it. Recognizing and abandoning ignorance is devaluing within us the importance that we place on those ignorant views. And by starting to recognize this is so superfluous is that exact process, the devaluing of something. And we can, no human being can let go of something that they feel is valuable, can we? We can't. At least I don't think we can. I can't imagine how a human being could let go of something that they place value on. I could only let go of the silly example of playing center field for the Yankees because I no longer place value on it. If I still thought there was something valuable to me, I'd still be clinging to that view. And so that's exactly what you're describing. So thank you for answering that, because that's something else I think we all have to look at. Life starts becoming, at times, almost too bland. And that's just all that we need to do. And we're saying, this is really, I don't know if I like this. Where is it coming from? Where's that thought coming from? Where's the feeling coming from? What's it part of? It's part of 5 clinging aggregates, part of wrong view. This is not me. This is not mine. This is not what I am. I'm seeking estrangement to form.
But the Buddha's teachings are not, the Buddha's teachings are about how to eliminate suffering in your life.
Yes.
But it's not about how to eliminate joy in your life.
No, in fact, it's...
So, if there are things that are joyful in your life,
That's such an important thing. Again, the context, this is so important. Look at the context. The Buddha's not saying, don't ever look at a beautiful sunset. He's saying, don't create an attachment to the beautiful sunset through these 5 clinging aggregates.
disappointed if tonight there's no beauty.
Yes.
Right.
And the joy in the moment is joy in the moment. And sadness in the moment is sadness in the moment. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
I am not sad because something happened that I wish didn't happen. I'm sad because what happened happened. It's part of having a human life.
So when we talk about, in a sense, tempering your passions, it's in context, it's the passions that border on addiction or dependence or expectation.
That's it. Yeah.
Making, those things where if it doesn't happen, there's great sorrow because you were clinging to that concept, that expectation. So so it's only like part of, what he's teaching us is just part of the equation of life. How to avoid our suffering. And it doesn't mean the elimination of the joy and the rainbows.
Yeah. Yes. The point is that the rainbows, the things that bring joy to our life, are just as impermanent as the things that bring sadness or ambiguity, boredom. They're just part of having a human life. The problem is that we attach ourselves to it. Another way of saying that is that we insist that things only be, joyful or pleasant, however we see it. Awakening doesn't mean that there's never going to be a joyful moment. It simply means that we won't insist that every moment be a joyful moment, however I might see it. And remember, I'm judging. To me, at one time in my life, joy was being center field for the Yankees. Another time in my life, for a long, long time, joy was a full bottle of vodka and a couple of bags of cocaine. That I felt joyful. I can still feel the feeling when I walked out of a liquor store with a full bottle of vodka. I felt great for about a half an hour. So to insist that my life only be one way, meaning what I think is joyful, and I also want to make the point, addiction is an extreme example of craving and clinging, but we do that with all kinds of things. It could be with whatever a lot of chocolate cake tonight. Whatever it is, those are all impermanent things. They occur as a consequence of having a human life. The beautiful sunset, holding a baby, a wonderful time with our partner. These are all natural occurrences in life that if we fabricate them or think that we have to manipulate them in any way, we've lost everything. But another way of explaining this is the Dhamma allows us to have life come to us all the time. And as we know, when we take ourselves out of it, life is almost overwhelmingly abundant with things. It takes a well-concentrated mind at that point to live in life and not be attached to anything. So again, it's such great points. And we're really drilling down to the essentials here, aren't we? The Buddha taught a way to live not joyfully 100% of the time and not distracted or frustrated. He taught a way to live at peace with life as life unfolds, no matter what it is.
To me, the word unencumbered is one that works
Yeah,
for how I feel. By not attaching myself to sustained experiences or, anticipated but not achieved moments. So,
and you appreciate what's occurring, no matter how subtle it is, simply because it's what's occurring. In other words, we don't need the beautiful sunset to just enjoy the passing of time. The sun goes down.
right. Well, if you live under a constant blue sky, you don't notice it as much.
Yeah.
But when there's beautiful white clouds interrupting that blue, it's stunning.
Yeah.
So
Human
it's all
life is
part-
incredible.
Right, and even the sadness. We just experienced a visit with a dear friend who's in decline from cancer. But his smile is still there, his spirit is still there. And yet, if he's speaking to you about something difficult that you might be going through, his compassion is there. So he is living every moment that he has as it unfolds and in its real state. He's just a marvelous person.
Yeah, and think about what you just said too. That we're all going to end up like that. The cow's going to get every one of us. So how can I really realistically be present for each and every moment of my life? Because that's all that matters, isn't it? No matter what experiences we have, we can't take any of that with us either. But again, the Buddha realized that. I'm going to try to finish this because I know you guys want to run. Okay. With the fading of passion, they are liberated. When liberated, there is the knowledge. They are liberated. We know it. We're not taking anything on faith, especially blind faith. We know it. When we're liberated, we know it. They understand. Birth is exhausted. The integrated life, meaning integrated with the Eightfold Path, has been lived out. What can be done is done. Of this, there is no more beyond. No more beyond. Again, the Buddha's teaching his 5 friends, but now us too, because they all practice dharmas that taught that this life isn't all that important. What's important is what's beyond this life, because they couldn't figure out a way to understand this life. The Buddha did. Now, during this discourse, the hearts and minds of the bhikkhus were liberated from craving, aversion, and deluded thinking. The Khandana, one of these 5, awakened during the Buddha's first teaching. This is now the second teaching, and the other 4, that's what the Buddha is referring to, awakened. Just want to make sure that, yeah, that was the end of the sutta, so thank you. Frank, let's hear what you got to say before you run out.
Nothing. That was a great sutta on what I kind of experience every day. Through this conscious mind that's always with me when I'm awake. When I'm not in full understanding of what's going on, especially when I'm engaged with the external world, work, whatever, it's like things are happening fast. Name, form, self-identifying happens instantly. Through craving in a mind that's, in a conscious mind that's rooted in ignorance. And it's like a constant reminder that I just have to keep in right view. And it's tough. It's not an easy task. But I can say that my understanding of stress has gotten like deeper, more profound.
Yeah.
And how it originates. And so my understanding of those four tasks are
yeah. Thank you. Frank just described awakened right view. Right view, as the Buddha describes it, is knowing stress, knowing the origination of stress, knowing the cessation of stress. Knowing means you had the actual experience of this, and knowing the path leading to the cessation of stress. That's right view. Thank you, Frank. Eric, good to see you.
Good to see you too. I don't think I have anything to add to it. It's good to be here. I understood a lot of what you said. It was good.
Yeah, that is pretty good because a short while ago it would have sounded like all nonsense, right? Yeah, I mean that is. That's the days. So you're developing the Dhamma as intended. So I'm glad you guys made it tonight.
Good to
Safe
see
ride
everybody.
home.
You
Yeah.
Yeah, and come more often. Wow, we tore that wall down just in time, didn't we? Let's see who's online first. Hi, Maura.
Hi, John.
How are you?
Oh, is on the whole time.
What's that?
I hope I wasn't. I hope my I thought I was on mute, but
You were. I just unmuted you.
oh, okay, good. Phew. Because I was saying a lot of bad stuff. You really wouldn't wonder. Everybody wouldn't have been nice. It was wrong speech, but it wasn't rooted in ignorance. Anyway, excellent. I love this sutta, and there was something, but I'm there is a fatigue and tiredness right now, so my brain is feeling a little thick. But something that you said, every time I hear this stuff,
Did you just call this stuff?
Every time I hear the Dhamma, it just goes deeper, and I'll have to. I'm going to withhold what I'm going to say because it's just not clear because my brain is like right now. But I got it a little bit. Hi guys.
Hi, Maura. I'm glad you joined us tonight, Maura. Scott, I'm gonna see if Scott, I've unmuted your mic if you want to say hello. Hello, Scott. Did I unmute his mic? Well, I'm glad you joined us tonight, Scott. Jane, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. It's great.
Good.
I was going to say, I have nothing to add tonight, but great teaching. Thank you.
I'm glad you joined us. Kevin, how are you? We got a big, let's, we'll try to get through this. I'd like to hear from all of you tonight. It's not that late. It's only 7 o'clock, so we've got plenty of time. I'm glad you're here. Hey, Matt.
Hey, guys. Good to see everybody. This is one of my favorite suttas, I think.
Yeah.
You can have a favorite.
I got about 300 of them.
I don't know if this helps anyone, but the context in which the Buddha and the sangha developed this was through going forth into homelessness. So they went into homelessness and lived in rags and begged for their food. So was there still happiness? Was there still laughter? Was there still these things that are just human things? I'd say yeah. So I think part of the stripping down of life to its most basic things, where you just have a bowl for your food and some rags to wear, and hopefully some friends around you that you can talk to. And I think that sort of, when in that context, all of those things still come up. Personalization of sensation, wanting things to be different, sickness, aging, death, all of those things are still happening, whether we're driving our cars or we're living under a bridge. So don't know where I was going with that.
You bring up such a good point that the original sangha, like our sangha, is joyful. They weren't living destitute lives. In fact, they were thriving within the Dhamma. I mean, in general, there were a few like David Dada that wanted it to be different. He tried to kill the Buddha a couple of times. But that the other, we're so conditioned to think that our life is based on what's going on outside of us in our situation, that we really do lose sight of the fact that our life is determined by how we think about what we're doing and what we have, if we're attached to it. And that, as Matt said, we can live under a bridge with the right way of thinking and not take it personal. Doesn't mean it wouldn't be unpleasant. It would. That's just the way it is. The Buddha even talked about not having the right robes at certain times and getting eaten by bugs and stuff. But there's nothing taken personal. It's just a consequence of having a human life. Anyway.
I think my mind's been flashing back to what we looked at last week, actually, last Tuesday, and I know you've been speaking about form as our own personal bodies, but I really sort of got that form is impermanent. Form of everything is impermanent.
Yeah.
From the whole planet system to the leaves on the trees to our own personal bodies, they're always in motion, it's always moving. Form in that sense is also formless because it's always moving and changing, and so that's when you've been mentioning forms, I need to link into the feelings and everything else, the mental fabrications and everything, and realize that those are also impermanent on the absolute massive scale that I really believe it. So that's kind of where my mind is at the moment. That's what I've been thinking about.
Thank you. That is seeing it clearly. You have put aside a huge mental fabrication that you carried around for years, haven't you? And I mean, just to make the point, it's impermanent. No matter how long we might have believed something about ourselves, once it's gone, it's gone. And ultimately, the relationship to form is in our thoughts, and so it's ultimately our thoughts that we recognize are impermanent, and so not. Now again, that doesn't mean we don't lose our thoughts when we recognize that our thoughts don't describe us. They're simply thoughts. Much like Matt gave a good description to Lorna one day. It's much like our heart pumps blood through our arteries. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to direct it. Our thoughts should be that way most of the time. They just flow. And they're a reference to what's occurring, so we can walk down the steps and walk through the wall and walk through the wall. Maybe answer the phone when it rings. I don't. I'll show you guys later. The sixth sense base is important for what it is. We can't live in the world without it, but we can't create identities over it either. That's where we get into trouble. Good to see you, Tim.
Good to see you. This discussion is very similar to Saturday.
It is.
And to comment on what Matt was saying, when we're younger, and you mentioned it too, of having unrealistic expectations. We all do when we're young, right? But the fabric time and the unfolding of time is in today's terminology is properly said, is a lot slower when you're younger. If you think about it, if you remember when you're young, and the reason being is because you haven't had time to have all these conditional thoughts piled on top of you, all these delusions piled on top of you as society moves on and you get older. And then when we get older, it just seems like time just flies by. And we look in the mirror and we're like, and then the self is angry, right? Of a lost life.
Yeah.
And So when I look at time now, and I'm doing my jhana practice, I'm becoming more sensitive to these things. They still occur, but I'm able to recognize what they are.
Yep. Another word, sensitive is a euphemism right now for mindfulness. That you're developing that type of mindfulness.
Yeah, but I don't. It's not. This sutra reminded me of it. It's not. I don't think it's still. But it's still painful, and I don't mean painful like physically painful, but you still have that. That self, that ego self that's there, that's been developing over all these years.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost. I wanted my 16-year-old daughter to join me. Because I'm like, if I can get her started on this now, well, it's funny, but truthfully, I'm going to say that it's personal, but I see the things that are going on in the 16-year-old life, because we'll all live them, and I'm saying you're going to pay for that when you're 50. That emotional, the conditions, the fabrications, they're on. And so this sutta is so valuable because, I seem like I'm really amped up about it, but
we should be.
Yeah, I should be, but time can be perceptually slowed down by relinquishing those material things around us. The less we have, yes, and I think that's kind of like, if you live that way, then those things never will hurt you because you don't have them.
That's right. That's going into homelessness. There's a paradox here that I think we've all experienced. The more time we put into meditation, the more time it seems that we have. It just does. And I don't think I've ever met anybody that actually developed a Dhamma practice that would disagree with that. It just, and there's practical reasons for that. One is just we're our minds are so compulsively stuck in the past or future. Right. But as our minds quiet down and we just start disentangling from the world, moving a little bit towards that homelessness, we don't have to. We simply not involved in a million different things. It's our outer world then becomes a reflection of our inner calm. Except Maura. Go, Maura. Yes. Sorry, Maura.
Hi, John. Good to be in this place.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. I forgot him. Thank you, Ron. You did great. And Nacho.
And you, Joe.
I offered an awful lot of visual encouragement.
Give this man a crowbar and start the life.
Commercial roofer, right, John?
What's that?
You can swing a hammer like a commercial roofer, right?
Still, yeah. That was good for about 3 minutes.
A very slow, long.
Yeah. Someone had to watch these two guys.
Yeah, it's one of the classic suttas. And I actually, when I started reading it the other night, I glommed on to the commentaries that you had in the end of it about continuity and the perception of permanence that it gives, and how it affects the mind. And somewhere in there, I finally started to get a glimpse, because I've been troubled by Khandana. The way, the all permanent things that arise, pass away. That's the arising part. And then he says they pass away. And the Buddha just jumps out of his seat and says, yeah, that's it. And I still haven't gotten that. That's it. What's he talking about? But this section that you wrote here on continuity, permanence, and how the mind turns that into the fabricated self.
Yep.
I think that's where I have to chew on that a little bit more after I say often, but Kandana's little flashbulb.
Yes. What Ram is referring to, I won't get into the whole thing because I was trying to brief. There is a paradox, huh? The continuity obscures impermanence, doesn't it? And because this looks like it certainly has been continuing for 64 years. A person who's not thinking clearly could assume, well, it's going to keep going forever. When it doesn't, we get shocked by those kind of things. But we do that with not just our body, we do it with our thoughts. And we create thought constructs that we continue. We maintain the continuity of perceptions and fabrications. But it takes a constant reaffirming of ignorant views to maintain that continuity. That's really the underlying stress of everything. That's it. That's the most debilitating aspect of stress is this subtle tension that we create within ourselves to continue ongoing continuity, to continue ignorance of Four Noble Truths. You were going to say something?
Just that's what time is. Time is always in relation to continuing my experience and acquisition in time.
Yeah.
And that once we develop this path and go forth, that continuous need to have time serve my acquisition starts to fall away, and then time is not that anymore. Something else.
Time is just time.
Time is just time.
John, can I say something?
Yes.
Again, thanks, Matt, because I was when Tim was talking about time, I was having that similar reflection, but I wouldn't be able to articulate it so well because there's a change in time. It's not only slowing down, doing less or something. The whole without self-referential attachments, time becomes something very slippery. I'll just say. But one of the things that I wanted to, what struck me earlier, talking about, let me see, results in automatic. So in the beginning of the sutta, it's like our distraction with dukkha, how it results in automatic suffering, right? So that's like really straightforward. And I remember that when we did this sutta way back in the first time on retreat. And I think a lot of people that were there at that retreat had that similar experience of just this, like the beginning of a real awakening, really a seed of understanding.
I remember your reaction to that.
It was very profound, and interestingly enough, so that the whole thing of like how the Buddha took through, if it's impermanent, it must be suffering, it must, it can't be self, it can't be, right? I was like, right, that makes total sense. And out of that arises, and when mindfulness is strong, there's, so Helen was pointing towards, is there joy, is there not, all this stuff we go on and about hypotheses or experiences and such. And I find that when I'm in, this is not me, this is not self, etc. Not only is there a great joy that arises, the mind also coalesces, it becomes concentrated, which has a very pleasant quality towards it. I mean, feeling tone, and then, it connections the next and the next. So there's a great sense of ease with what's occurring. And then if there happens to be another being in front, that same thought, this is not me, this is not self, that actually anger can turn very quickly into compassion without any cognition. It's just automatic. One can see more clearly what's going on without personalizing it. And that's, to me, like the whole freedom, because then one knows how to respond harmoniously rather than with conflict. And that's a very powerful, joyful thing to be able to do. And this weighing, I think, over and over, like passion takes so long to kind of understand that, but the more that one practices diligently in that line of understanding how something impermanent cannot bring satisfaction, this passion naturally arises, and so does joy.
Yes.
So,
Beautifully said, Maura.
Thank
The all of those things, the anger, the frustration, all those fabricated ways of living in the world takes tremendous energy and constant attention to maintain them. The while you were talking, I was thinking that was probably 2014, the first time. Sutta is something we taught and never retreat since 2014, but we're not this time. We're going to be a different step. Yeah, hope you can handle it. And all of this points to impermanence isn't bad. The progression of time from one moment to the next is not something bad or that we should resist. In fact, that's rooted in ignorance as well. Time is simply part of the phenomenal world. It speaks to the understanding of the third noble truth, that cessation of stress and suffering is possible. If it wasn't for impermanence, nothing would change, would it? Alvin Toffler, who wrote a book, pretty good book back in the 80s called Future Shock. And I don't remember the whole book, just one line. And he said that time is a currency of exchange that makes all things possible. If it wasn't for impermanence, we couldn't awaken, could we? It's because of the unfolding of time with a well-concentrated mind holding the refined mindfulness that as time unfolds, we awaken. As long as we don't personalize time. It's not my time. Kate, good to see you tonight. How are you?
Nothing for me tonight.
I'm glad you're here. Good morning, Helen. Good evening, Helen.
Good evening, John. I'll be brief.
It will be soon.
I just wanted to tell too that we have 2 more sisters for you to meet. And our youngest sister one time said that she was so grateful for having older sisters because she could garnish our wisdom at an early age. And her friends would be amazed at how wise she was because she had us. So there's a benefit of time. No, I understand. I don't know if it sounded like I didn't understand, but I do understand that, the Buddha's focus was on relieving stress and pain and distress and confusion. And it wasn't about that's all there is to life, is working on that. So I do understand that, and that the counter of that is joy. And as we talked about, if you live under a bridge, you've got a refrigerator box, you're happy.
Good to go. Yeah.
So there's just all different ways to be joyful, even at the saddest time, because it can be a reflection of a life well lived. So, I do understand the balance of that. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Good evening, Mary.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, it was really beautiful. I sometimes think about how joy and time is affected by recognizing what is no longer there and what has fallen away, and sometimes that's the new joy,
Yeah.
that, wow, I remember that in this situation I might have used to have wrong views and engaged in all manner of whatever, and that didn't happen in this moment, right? So just recognizing that, and it becomes the direct experience with what is the Dhamma versus what is not, and what is, I don't know, a wholesome life and what is not. and the continuation of the falling away and the stripping down to what is. And what is isn't in the past or the future, it just is here now, and the absence of all that stuff you used to bring into to every moment, combined with that pull to worry and regret and hope and want for the future and all those things. And when they fall apart, that's what is.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Good evening, David.
That beautiful space inside.
Glad to see you here. Hello, Michael.
Exactly. Yep. Well,
Glad you're here. Hello, Julia.
Hello, John. Thank you very much for your teaching, Noble Silence.
Glad you're here. Hello, Bonnie.
Hello. Thank you. I'm gonna just
Great. Hello, Liz.
I feel like I've already talked tonight, but this was a good class.
Yeah, I agree. Hello, Russ. Good to see you again.
I really enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it. Appreciated what I heard from you and everybody. So.
Glad you're here. Hey, Brett.
Hi, good to be here. Thanks for the teaching, and a lot of things are prevalent in my life that are happening now, and like we said, about the ideas of what the baseball reference, and so many things in my life that I've aspired to be and stuff like that. And, it's like some of them, they all are happening, but it's like to let go of those ideas, and I think those things are really, they just don't get me. So it's and let's let life unfold, I guess, that's where I keep on coming back to, because like I was working today, and I got to finish a job, and usually I'm attached to the outcome of the job, and it's just not there anymore. And so you just have to be happy with what and enjoying yourself, and the outcome is just it is what it is when it's finished. So
That's a hard one.
yeah, thanks.
Glad you joined us. Something else I was going to say. I can't think of what it was. Wonderful class. We'll continue with this series Saturday. Our retreat's coming up in just a couple weeks. And I think we'll finish as we always do with metta. So this sutta, though, just to touch on it again, this sutta can be seen as the central point of this whole series of talks, and the central point of the Buddha's Dhamma is recognizing wrong views of self, abandoning those, and developing an authentic view of self. It's so important. There's two sides to that. It's just not, because it seems like annihilation at first, doesn't it? I'm going to let go of everything I thought about myself and all the things that I'm attached to and all that. But what you're gaining is what's real. Something that you actually, well, I'm going to say you can't hold on to, but something that you can actually experience life through moment by moment in a realistic way. It's a pretty good deal. So we'll finish with metta, as we always do. So again, just find your relaxed meditation posture you already have, and just take a moment to become mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath. And these are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties, and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class tonight. Peace. Liz, am I correct to assume that there's enough to share? We have chocolate cake, folks, if you want to. Sorry, Maura. Sorry, Jane. Good for you. See you, Maura. See you, Jane.
I got vegan cupcakes today from one of my patients.
Huh. Where are they?
Sorry, Tony.
I'll see you soon.
Talk to you.